Here we go. Thank you, Tom. Thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to so many of you this evening. As Tom mentioned, I work at the University of Bath. I've been there for about 10 years and I work in student recruitment and admissions. And really this evening, I'm hoping to give you a fairly broad the journey looks like if your son or daughter is going to be applying for higher education to start a course, probably next September in 2024 or potentially after that. So I'd really like to cover three main areas this evening. So I'm going to kick off by talking about the research process. So exploring your options in terms of a course and an institution. I'm going to talk a little bit also about the application process itself, and then finish up very quickly by reflecting on how universities make decisions as to who should receive an offer and how students then respond to those decisions through UCAS. Now, in terms of the research phase, I guess there are two really kind of key aspects to the application journey, and they are considering which course to study and, of course, where to study it. And in general, we would advise that students, in the first instance, start to think about the academic area that they would like to study at university. Once they've begun to narrow that down, probably over the summer months, then they should hopefully be in quite a good position to decide where they might want to study that course or potentially group of courses that they're still considering. When you're thinking about a subject to study at university, I guess you could summarize, the key kind of considerations in the way that I have done on this slide. So when you're thinking about which course you might wish to study, fairly obviously your son or daughter is going to want to pick something that they are genuinely interested in and enthusiastic about. Studying a degree is a fairly long process, so it's going to be at least 3 years. In some cases it can be 4 or even 5 years, and so it's really important to pick something that either you already know that you enjoy studying, perhaps you study it as one of your A-levels, or that is aligned to your personal interests or related to other courses that you enjoy, and that gives you the confidence that you'll really be able to enjoy that subject at university level. Students are also obviously going to want to pick a course that they feel relatively confident they can succeed in. So they'll be looking at their ability, how they've achieved in terms of their GCSEs and their A-levels, and having confidence that they'll be able to succeed in the academic areas that are covered in the course. And then finally, many students, although it has to be said, not all, will also be considering their career prospects and how does the degree that they're considering studying fit in with their longer term goals. Now, not every student obviously knows what they want to do when they graduate, and in fact many have got very little idea whatsoever, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're picking a course that's well aligned to your interests, a course that you're well prepared to succeed in, then there's a very good chance that it will lead to careers for which you will be well suited and which hopefully will be really rewarding for you. One of the really nice features about choosing a course at university is that there is an absolutely huge array of choice available to students. And I've tried to kind of summarize some of the ways that you might think about different course groupings at university on this slide. So on the left-hand side, you've got a column for studying a course which is a continuation of something that you already study at A-levels or in your BTEC or level 3 qualification. So examples of that would include history or biology, chemistry, physics, etc. In addition, though, students quite often will explore options that are related to something that they currently study potentially, but are different. So for example, rather than choosing a physics degree, a student who really enjoys physics and probably maths might want to consider studying a degree in mechanical engineering, which is something that isn't available before university study, but has fantastic career prospects. And if you are engaged in maths and physics, will probably be a really rewarding and relevant degree for you. There are also lots of degrees where you can study across multiple academic disciplines. And a really good example of this is a natural science degree. So if your son or daughter were interested in biology or chemistry, rather than just studying one of those subjects at university, they might want to do natural sciences, which will allow them to study those subjects along with pharmacology, environmental science, etc., and potentially study 6 or 7 different sciences as part of their degree. Finally, there's a whole group of courses which are very vocational in nature. So if your son or daughter has a good understanding about what their career plans are, that may free them up to pick a course that is very closely aligned to their future career plans. A classic example of that is medicine. So obviously, if you want to go into practicing medicine, you'll need to do an undergraduate degree in medicine, but there are lots of other examples as well. So courses, for example, in languages which are very much focused on translation, pharmacy, social work, etc. When your son or daughter is exploring which type of courses they might be interested in, as well as the subject itself, I think it's also really important to consider the nature of the individual course at a particular institution. And I'd probably say that there are four things that I think are particularly important to think about. So first of all is course content. Probably the biggest difference between pre-university study and university study is that if you do what looks like the same degree at different institutions, you may be covering very, very different academic material and topics and themes. And so it's really important to consider what specifically is taught within the course. If you come to Bath to do economics, you'll probably complete quite a different set of modules to if you study economics at Durham or Exeter or Oxford. It's also really important, I think, to consider how the course is taught and also how it is assessed. I guess those two things go together. Traditionally, degrees are taught in lectures. You might have some seminar groups, etc., and then traditionally a lot of examinations towards the end of the year, and particularly towards the end of the degree program itself. But there's a lot of variation, and I think the variation in how courses is delivered has increased in recent years. So lots of students are very keen to gravitate towards courses where the teaching is very practical. So if you're considering a science or engineering degree, you might want to think about what project work is available and whether that project work counts towards your final assessment grades. And likewise, you may want to pick a course if you were considering in, let's say, business or management, where you're going to be doing lots of presentations, lots of group work, lots of discussions, instead of just doing the classic coursework and examinations at the end of the year. The size of the degree itself in terms of the number of students can also have a real impact as to what the experience is like. So, some of the larger degree programs that we have, for example, at Bath would probably have 200 to 300 students in the first year, whereas some of the smallest would have maybe only 30 or 40. And clearly you're going to have a very different experience if you're on a really large course to if you're on a much smaller courses. There are pros and cons to both. Often large courses will mean more choice of academic subjects and themes to explore, a wider range of research interests represented in the department, etc. But clearly on a smaller course, it's much easier to get to know your tutors, the academics, to get to know everyone else on your course on first name terms, etc. And a final thing that I'd really encourage people to consider is looking and considering degree courses that have an integrated placement. So that may be a professional work placement, or it may be a period of study abroad. And so, for example, at Bath, almost all of our courses have the option of doing an extra year. So a standard degree would be 4 years rather than 3, and you would spend a full year on placement. It's a really good way to put into practice what you're learning in your academic studies. It's a really good way to build links with the industry in which you wish to work. Most placements are paid as well, which is a nice benefit. And ultimately, students who get that type of experience as part of their degree often find themselves at an advantage when they graduate and they're looking for their first graduate role. In terms of comparing and contrasting seemingly similar courses at different institutions, there are lots of league tables and rankings available, and there are probably 3 main publications in the UK. So you've got the Times, the Guardian, and the Complete University Guide. By and large, they tend to agree with each other, although they all give slightly different weighting to various metrics, but they're a pretty valuable source of independent information. You can look at both university league tables, which rank every university in the UK against each other, and also subject rankings. So for whichever academic area you're interested in, you can see which courses in the UK are most highly ranked. And in general, I would recommend being led by the subject rankings over the institution rankings. It's probably better to study a subject which is delivered to a really high standard at a potentially mid-ranking university than to go to a university that has a fantastic overall reputation, but maybe doesn't specialize in the subject area that you're really interested in. And when students are looking at ranking information, there's lots of things that they can consider, but I suggest that two things that are really important to look out for are student satisfaction. So that's based on something called the National Student Survey. It's completed by final year students as they graduate. So it's a very direct measure of how satisfied current students are with the quality of their education, and also graduate prospects. So that's normally based on either the proportion of graduates who go into high skilled or professional level roles when they graduate, or it will be based on average earnings probably 18 months after graduation. So again, it's a really useful measure in understanding how much the degree is going to facilitate you and give you an advantage in the employment market. Once you've started to think about some of these things and choosing a course, then you can begin to potentially narrow down your options and consider which institutions you might want to actually study at. I guess the most fundamental decision lots of students have is, do they want to stay at home or do they want to go away and potentially live slightly more independently? There are obviously pros and cons to both approaches, but most students will have an inkling as to whether they want to remain at home or whether they want to move away to university. Clearly, if you stay at home, it's probably going to be cheaper. Presumably, you won't be paying quite as much rent. I guess the transition in some regards is easier because you're still in a familiar environment. You may have lots of your existing friends and peer group around you, and of course, your family, and you'll probably be really well supported. On the flip side, if you choose to move away and go and live at the university, lots of students feel that that's a really enriching experience. It's probably the first time they'll have lived away from home independently in many cases, but not all. It makes it much easier to access the university facilities. You're likely to have everything on your doorstep, and it's probably easier to integrate into the overall student community. Making the decision to move away is obviously quite potentially daunting for some students, but it's also really exciting. And I would say that, you know, often, or almost always, if students are willing to move away from home, it will open up for them a wider range of courses to choose from. So unless you're in a luxurious situation of having quite a lot of fantastic courses right on your doorstep, choosing to move away should open up more options for you. The other fundamental choice, I guess, when it comes to which institution to study in is choosing between a campus-based and a city-based university. Lots of students are completely happy to consider either, but I'd really strongly recommend that any students who are looking to particularly to move away to university, probably visit at least a couple of campus-based options and a couple of city-based options, because they can be quite different. In general, campuses are very self-contained. It's not true of every campus. Some campuses are actually very large, and sometimes campus universities are spread across multiple sites. But certainly if you come to Bath, it's a very self-contained campus. You can probably walk from one side to the other in 15 minutes. So you're never more than 5 or 10 minutes away from your lectures or your accommodation or the gym or the pool or whatever it is you want to access. Many students who are on campuses feel that they're part of quite a cohesive student community, so that's quite a nice feature. And often campuses are a little bit quieter and students feel a little bit safer, etc. On the flip side, moving into a city, particularly if you haven't lived in a really big city before, can be quite an exciting experience. You can immerse yourself in the wider community, so there will be other things going on other than just student-focused events and facilities, etc. You may need to travel a little bit more, particularly if you're in a city institution which is quite spread out. You may need to get a bus from accommodation to lectures, etc. As I said, lots of students happy to consider either, but many students also, when they start visiting, get a very strong sense of whether they'd be happier in a campus or a city-based institution. I think probably the final thing I'd say to consider when you're looking to narrow down your options for an individual institution is the facilities that are available. And obviously most universities, most larger universities, have a really wide range of fantastic facilities. When you go along to open days, or if you go and visit institutions, it's really important to really notice what is available to students and how easy it is to access. I guess initially you'll be looking at the department facilities. So if you want to study a particular course, what specialist equipment is available for you to use? How often will you be in the workshops or the labs if you're doing a science or engineering degree, etc. It's also worth thinking about the academic support that sits outside of the department. So that might be the library, student services centre, math support, English language support, etc., essay writing support. Most universities, of course, will have really extensive social, sports, arts facilities. So if you know that that is important to you, it's really important to visit those, understand how easy it is to access them. Are they going to be close to where you're living? Do you have to pay extra, for example, to use the sports facilities, and so on? Probably the best way to make some of these decisions and really explore these options is, of course, to go to main university open days. Generally, these happen over the summer months, so some probably have already started. Most will start in May or June. So at Bath, our first open days are in June, and they tend to run through to September, October, or November, depending on the institution. You can visit outside of open days. Certainly at Bath, you can come and do a campus tour more. But if you can go on an open day, you should be able to see all of the facilities, and they should be showcased for you, and you should be able to make the absolute most out of your time during the visit. In terms of top tips, I'd really encourage students to speak to as many current students as they can. There'll also be the opportunity to speak to academic staff and student support staff, but speaking to current students, I think, is probably the best way to evaluate whether you think what the university offers is well aligned to your particular preferences. It's absolutely fine to compare and contrast between different institutions. In fact, it's very much encouraged. I don't think choosing between two courses or two institutions is about choosing a good option over a bad option. It's about determining whether what a particular university or course offers is well aligned to what you're looking for and what you will find rewarding in the long term. I would encourage students not to be over reliant on parents. Obviously, it's really important to take on board parents' feedback. Most students will visit open days with their parents, which is really nice. But ultimately, students need to understand, particularly if they're going to be moving away, that they're making a really significant decision in their life, and they're going to be living in this environment for 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 years. So by all means, canvass opinion from parents, from teachers, from tutors, from friends, etc. But ultimately, every student needs to be very comfortable with the decision they're making about the course to study and also the environment in which they're going to be studying it. Most universities will have dates for summer open days on their website now, so you can go on and book online. And it is feasible in some cases, particularly if your son or daughter is exploring options a little further afield, to visit potentially 2 or 3 institutions over the weekend. So normally, for example, in the Southwest, we at Bath, Bristol and Exeter, we tend to get lots of applicants who apply to all 3 of us, or certainly 2 of us. So we tend to schedule our open days in quite close proximity, so that you can potentially come and do Bath on one day, stay over Bristol on the next, or Exeter on the next. So do have a look and see whether you can cross off 2 options in one trip. That brings me to the end of talking about the phase of researching your options in terms of a course and an institution. So I'm now going to move on to talk about the application process itself. And just to give a very top level view, you can see the key kind of dates for 2024 entry. So at the moment, we're not quite on this time frame, but on the 16th of May, UCAS will open undergraduate applications. So your son or daughter will be able to go onto their account, register their details, start submitting their details, but they won't actually be able to submit an application until at least the 5th of September. Most students submit application after that date, and school will of course have its own internal deadlines for submitting personal statement drafts, etc. But no student in the UK can submit an application until at least the 5th of September. There are then two kind of key application deadlines. So the first is on the 16th of October. So if your son or daughter is applying for a course at Oxford, Cambridge, or any course in the UK in medicine, veterinary science, dentistry, then they will need to submit those choices by the 16th of October. For all other courses, students have until the 31st of January to submit an application. And as long as you have an application in by that date, the university will still consider applications, and it is incumbent upon the university to treat all applications received up to that point equally. So it doesn't matter if you submit your application on the 5th of September or the 31st of January, you will be considered equally. The next dates are actually to be confirmed for 2024, but almost certainly once your son or daughter has submitted their choices, universities will have until May to make a decision. Quite often decisions are made much more quickly than that, sometimes even in a matter of days. But if your child is applying for a more competitive course, it's likely they will need to wait beyond the 31st of January deadline for a decision. And in many cases, many decisions are not made until March or even April. Once your son or daughter has all their decisions, then they can then reply and decide which offers to accept, and they will have until some point in June to do that. I think this year it's 8th of June for any decisions that were received by the May deadline. In terms of the basics of the application process, so students apply via UCAS Hub, which is an online facility. They can register at any time. They'll be able to submit up to 5 choices, so that's 5 different degrees they can apply for. They can all be at different institutions. Some of them can be at the same institution, but you are limited to 5 choices. If you're applying for medicine, veterinary science, dentistry, then you will be limited to 4 choices. Applications cost, I believe, £27.50, unless it's gone up slightly this year, but I believe it's £27.50. As I've said, really important to apply by the relevant equal consideration deadline. And crucially, when you submit your choices, your 5 choices, if you want to make 5, you do not rank them. It doesn't matter which order you submit the choices in. And also, each university you apply for will be unable to see where else you've applied. So you don't need to worry about ranking your choices, and you don't need to be worried about, oh, will it be looked on negatively if I apply to this institution or I apply to 2 similar institutions, etc. When students are looking to submit their application, of course, they'll be looking for courses where the entry requirements are relatively well aligned to their expectations. Typically, universities publish entry requirements as either grades. So, for example, if you're an A-level student, you apply to Bath, we'd make an offer of 2 A's and a B, or 2 A stars and an A. Some institutions instead use UCAS tariff points. So an offer might be, for example, 120 tariff points, and each qualification, each A-level or BTEC you complete will be worth a certain number of tariff points. Some courses have essential subject requirements. So generally speaking, if you want to study maths at degree level, unsurprisingly, you will have needed to have studied maths at A level. Some universities may even have expected you to study further maths. In other cases, there are no essential requirements, but for more competitive courses, there may be preferred subject combinations. So for example, if you're applying to Bath for psychology, which is one of our most competitive courses, you are much more likely to secure an offer if your A-levels or equivalent qualifications have a mixture of numerical and essay-based subjects, because the degree will require proficiency in both areas. So neither are essential, but you're much more likely to secure an offer if you have that mix. And particularly if your son or daughter is applying for choices which are slightly more aspirational, it's really important to understand what the preferred subject combinations are. And if you're in any doubt, just contact the university and they'll be able to confirm. Many universities offer alternative offers, so it's really worth looking out for that as well. In general, these will be grade reductions either as a contextual offer. So if a student comes from a background or a location where a relatively low proportion of students progress to university, they may be eligible for a reduced offer. Also, for example, at Bath, we offer an alternate offer for students undertaking the extended project qualification, which would again be 1 grade below our standard offer, plus an A in the EPQ. And the final thing to think about is do I need any specific experience to apply for this degree? Outside of very vocational degrees, I would say that's pretty unusual. In fact, at Bath, apart from one degree, I don't think we look for any work experience. But if you're applying for a very vocational course, the university may expect you to have certain work experience. So it's worth checking whether that is the case. As I said previously, students are able to apply for up to 5 choices, and that's one of the pluses of the UCAS system. So when your son or daughter is thinking about entry requirements, generally speaking, it is absolutely fine to potentially use 2 choices which are a bit more aspirational, where maybe the student is thinking, well, I'm not 100% sure I can get those grades, but I want to go for those courses and see if I can get an offer, and maybe 2 or 3 choices which they have a greater degree of confidence in, and where it's much more likely they will secure an offer. Once the application is submitted, of course, universities then look to make a decision. And in general, we'll be looking at the 6 factors on this screen. So we'll be considering the student's previous academic performance. So most typically in the UK, that will be in GCSEs. We'll be looking at their predicted academic performance, so predicted grades provided by the school. We will be looking at the student's personal statement, which I'm going to come on and talk about in a moment. The school will also provide an academic reference. We will consider any contextual data. So as I said earlier, we will look at the student's home postcode, where they're based, etc. And we will also consider any mitigating circumstances. So if the student or the school feels that the individual's studies have been disrupted in any way, potentially by a period of illness, etc., particularly if that's impacted examinations, then we will potentially be able to take that into consideration when deciding whether to make an offer. Of those 6 factors, the one that's probably going to fill your son or daughter's mind the most over the coming months is the personal statement. So the personal statement is 4,000 characters, 47 lines of text. It's actually quite concise. So it's about one size of A4. So it's really important to be quite concise and articulate in the way that you write the statement. In general, your son or daughter will be writing a single personal statement, and it will be sent to all of their university choices. If they're applying for an unusual combination of courses, sometimes universities will consider an alternative personal statement. So for example, if you were applying for 4 medicine degrees and a pharmacy degree, potentially as a backup, you could submit the medicine statement with your main application, and then contact the pharmacy choice to see if they consider an alternative personal statement for pharmacy. Personal statement is really your opportunity, or a student's opportunity, to speak directly to the person who's going to make a decision on their application, and to hopefully convince them as to why they should make them an offer. Particularly when applying for more competitive courses, I think the really important thing to understand is often, if you look at the predicted grades, if you look at the achieved grades of the applicants for the course, in general, they will be relatively similar, and often the students will be studying quite a similar range of subjects. So the personal statement is really the big opportunity for the candidate to make themselves stand out. If a student applies for a course that interviews applicants, then the statement can be used as the basis for an interview. So it's really important to re-familiarize yourself with what you've written before you attend an interview. It's a really good opportunity to talk about some non-academic things, so work experience, additional activities, etc. And crucially as well, personal statements can be really important in what we call near-miss decisions. And what this means is, if a student applies for a course, they receive an offer, they accept an offer because they really want to study that course, but they don't quite meet the offer conditions, they don't quite get the grades. Where we can, generally speaking, universities will still look to admit students in those circumstances, but there are likely to be limited places available to do so. And so when making those near-miss decisions, most likely the university will re-review applications and look at personal statements again. So the statement can be really important in determining whether you receive an offer for the course in the first instance, but then if you don't meet that offer, it can be important in determining whether you are still accepted onto the course. I'm not going to go into too much detail about writing a personal statement. There's quite a lot of information available online, but just in terms of some quick top tips, Particularly when applying for more competitive courses, I would suggest, or we at Bath would suggest, a ratio of about 80% academic content to around about 20% focused on non-academic things, so extracurricular activities. What we're really looking for is evidence of how the student is engaging with the subject or the subject area that they want to study at university. And in the next slide, I'm going to share some examples of how students can do that. We want to see clear evidence. It's really important that spelling and grammar is accurate. There are obviously no excuses because it's done electronically. Students should leave lots of time to draft and redraft their statement. I'm sure they will get lots of feedback from the school, so that will really help them to improve as they move towards their final draft. It's really important when writing a personal statement to use quite clear, concise language. Some students do fall into the trap of possibly trying to make themselves sound very intelligent, very clever. They use lots of long words, there's lots of hyperbole. It often isn't the best approach. In fact, I'd say generally it isn't the best approach. Whoever reads a personal statement will likely read hundreds, if not thousands, of very similar statements every year. So the best tactic to pursue is to make the points that you are trying to make as clear and easy to process as possible. And related to that, I'd also encourage students not to overuse quotes. You've got a really limited amount of text to work with, and what we're really interested in is the student's own perspective on the academic subject, information on the student's experiences, etc., not just their ability to kind of quote various things that have been written by other people. The other slight problem with quotes as well is no matter how imaginative they are, probably whoever reads it has seen the quote many times before, and therefore it might not quite have the impact that the student is hoping for. As I said, though, the key to an effective personal statement, particularly for a competitive course, is talking about why you're applying for the subject, how you're engaging with the subject, your enthusiasm for the subject, and how it's going to help you kind of longer term career plans. And there are lots of ways that students can do that, but some of the key kind of things that we might look for in a personal statement and we'd most frequently see in terms of showing your engagement with the subject would be something like undertaking project qualification. So if your son or daughter is undertaking the EPQ or something similar, and it's related to the subject they're applying for, then that can give them some really good experiences to reflect on in their statement. There are lots of free online courses available. So some of the most popular are MOOCs, so that's massive open online courses. FutureLearn runs some really good courses, and also OpenLearn, which is run by the Open University. These are typically free. They're 3 or 4 hours of study a week over maybe 3 or 4 weeks. A really good opportunity for students to either engage with an area of a subject they already study that they know very little about, and that can be a really effective thing to reflect on in their statement. Or alternatively, if they're applying for engineering or international development or something else that they've not had the opportunity to study at A level, it can give them a really good insight and help them convince the person considering their application that they truly do understand what they'll be studying on the course. There's lots of really good online and on-demand content. So as long as it's a fairly reputable source, it's worth citing. So TED Talks, podcasts, things on the iPlayer, etc. Almost all statements will, of course, cite some level of further reading. So this can be quite varied. Obviously, if you're applying for English or history, it might be literature. If you're applying for business or economics or politics, you might cite something you've seen in The Economist or the Financial Times. If you're applying for a science-based course, reading some recent research papers can give you a really good insight to the course and some really good things to reflect on. And likewise for engineering or something like that, it might be reading periodical publications, that type of thing. Any academic projects or competitions, either through the school or independently, are great to reference. And finally, over the coming months, lots of universities will be running summer schools. So some of them are paid for, some of them are free, some of them are free if you meet certain criteria, but it is worth having a look and seeing if you can see something that's aligned to the subject that you want to study. If it's at a university you're interested in, then all the better. But even if it's not, going to a university summer school can give you a really valuable insight into what studying a particular discipline at degree level would be like. So it is worth having a look, and it's a really good thing to reflect on in a personal statement. So the final area I'd like to cover off just before I finish is the process of universities making offers and students then deciding which offer to accept. I'm not going to go into too much detail. This is a fair way off at the moment. You're probably going to be in the midst of this stage in a year's time, and there's lots of information on the UCAS website. But essentially, once universities receive an application, they will make a decision. Hopefully that decision will be to make the student an offer. So the application will be successful. And in almost all cases, universities will make what is called a conditional offer. And what that means is the university is saying, based upon the application we received, we are very comfortable in making the student an offer. And as long as they obtain certain requirements, typically academic requirements, so certain grades, possibly in certain subjects, then we will accept them onto the course. As I alluded to earlier, if the student receives a conditional offer and doesn't quite meet the requirements, they may still be accepted onto the course, but it isn't guaranteed. Alternatively, unfortunately, for some choices, students may, of course, be made unsuccessful. Once students have heard back from all of their choices, by May at the very latest, they will then be able to respond. They will make one firm choice. So that's the course that they've received an offer for that they would really like to study and is their first choice. And if they wish to, they may also make an insurance choice. And the idea of that is it should be a backup option. So in theory, at least, the entry requirements or the offer for the insurance choice should be below the firm choice. The idea being if you don't quite get into your firm choice, then you should hopefully have a good chance of going to your insurance choice institution. Any other offers will be declined, and then the next thing will be waiting for examination results and then finding out whether you've been accepted onto the course. There is another route to university, which is clearing. It used to be something, I think, which had a bit of a negative reputation, but it's really important to emphasize there are lots of really high quality courses available in clearing, and that has been the case consistently over recent years. So if your son or daughter does end up in the situation where they don't have a place, either because they haven't had a place confirmed or they've actually had second thoughts and thought, you know, on reflection, I don't think that course is right for me, it is absolutely worth exploring options in clearing. Many Russell Group and really prestigious institutions will have a limited amount of vacancies in clearing, so there is still another option to secure a really good place on a degree. That brings me towards the end of the presentation, so I hope that's been useful. I've tried to cover the three kind of main phases of the application journey in front of you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to everyone. As Tom said, I'm more than happy to answer any questions, and I wish you all, and of course your son or daughters, the best of luck as they explore their options. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that presentation. Incredibly comprehensive. Hopefully that's really started to navigate you through many of the sort of questions that I'm sure you're sort of asking yourself in terms of thinking about the university application process. Just to reassure you, the school prides itself on the work that it does around personal statements, and that's something that Year 12 will be spoken to about at length as this half-term progresses once their mocks have been completed. So in terms of sort of the presentation now, I'm going to stop recording shortly. As I said, this will be made available, this whole presentation, on the school YouTube channel, and also the slide deck from tonight's presentation will also be made available as a PDF on the sixth form section of the school website in a specific tab. But I think it probably just goes without saying, you know, there's a reason why Bath, you know, was voted, you know, University of the Year by the Times in terms of the accolades, and I think hopefully you're as impressed as I was by Steve and all of his professional knowledge and also enthusiasm, and also the fact it wasn't a sales pitch for Bath, which I always think is you know, very much appreciated, because there's many fantastic institutions out there. So thank you very much. So please feel free to head off now and exit if you need to. Equally, once I've stopped recording, I'm going to unmute everybody, and if anybody would like to ask me questions, please just put your hand up and we'll kind of work our way through. Okay. And I think there's some maybe in the chat as well that I could ask, but if you don't want to stay, feel free to go. Many thanks and have a lovely evening.